The rope burns against my wrists as I hang from the barn rafters, blood dripping from my split lip onto the hay below. 12 pairs of terrified eyes stare up at me from the chains that bind them to the support beams. The girls I freed, the girls I failed to protect. Outside, 200 riders circle my ranch like vultures, their torches casting dancing shadows through the barn slats. My father's voice cuts through the night air like a blade. "You thought you could make a fool of me, boy." The metallic taste of blood fills my mouth as I try to speak. My shoulders scream in agony from supporting my full weight. Sarah, barely 16 with corn silk hair matted against her tear-streaked face, mouths the word sorry to me. Sorry. As if any of this nightmare is her fault. As if buying her freedom and 11 others from the slave markets was something I should regret. The barn door explodes inward. Jeremiah Cartwright steps into the lamplight, his silver hair gleaming, his cold blue eyes reflecting the flames outside. My father, the cattle baron who owns half of Texas and every soul unfortunate enough to live on his land. His leather boots echo against the wooden floor as he approaches, each step a death knell. $12,000, he says, his voice deadly quiet. $12,000 of my money you stole to buy these creatures their freedom. He spits the word freedom like poison. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I taste copper and defiance. They're human beings. His backhand sends stars exploding across my vision. The rope cuts deeper into my wrists. They're property, my property. Just like you, boy. Just like everything on this ranch. Through the barn slats, I can see the riders. 200 armed men, all loyal to the Cartwright name. All ready to kill on his word. The torchlight glints off rifle barrels and the cruel smiles of men who've been waiting for an excuse to spill blood. My blood. The blood of 12 innocent girls whose only crime was trusting me to keep them safe. "Please," whispers Maria, the eldest of the girls at maybe 22, her dark eyes wide with terror. "Please don't hurt him because of us." My father's laugh chills my bones. Hurt him? Oh, my dear, I'm not going to hurt my son. He draws his Colt .45, the metal singing as it clears the holster. I'm going to teach him a lesson about the natural order of things. About what happens when cattle forget their cattle. The gun's barrel feels ice cold against my temple. I can smell the oil, the metal, the death that lives inside that weapon. My heart hammers against my ribs so hard I'm certain it will burst. This is how I die. Hanging in a barn, surrounded by the very people I tried to save. "You have 30 seconds to decide, Thomas," he whispers in my ear. "Watch me put a bullet in each of these girls' heads, or tell me where you've hidden the freedom papers. Their deaths or their slavery. Choose." The world tilts. 30 seconds. The girl's eyes plead with me from below. Sarah's lips move in silent prayer. Maria clutches the hand of young Beth, who can't be more than 14. Outside, the riders grow restless, their horses stamping, leather creaking, metal jangling. The smell of sweat and fear and impending violence fills the air. 20 seconds. My father cocks the hammer. The sound echoes like thunder in the confined space. Several of the girls sob openly now. I can hear my ranch hands shouting outside, probably tied up somewhere, helpless to intervene. The home I built, the sanctuary I tried to create, all of it crumbling around me. 10 seconds. Time's up, boy. But this story begins 6 months earlier, when I first saw the auction block in Amarillo and decided that some things are worth dying for. The Amarillo slave market stank of human misery and my father's money. I'd ridden into town that scorching June morning with orders to buy cattle, not souls. But the sight of that auction block changed everything. 12 girls, ages 14 to 22, stood chained together like livestock while men in fine suits examined their teeth and felt their arms for muscle. What am I bid for this fine specimen? The auctioneer's voice carried across the dusty square as he grabbed Sarah's chin, forcing her to look at the crowd. Young, strong, good for breeding or field work. My stomach churned. I'd grown up on the Cartwright Ranch knowing we owned people, but I'd never witnessed the buying. My father, Jeremiah Cartwright, had shielded me from this particular family business, preferring I focus on cattle and land management. Now I understood why. The reality was 1,000 times more brutal than the carefully sanitized version I'd lived with. 500, called a tobacco-stained rancher. 6, shouted another. I found myself pushing through the crowd, my hand reaching for the roll of bills my father had given me for cattle purchases. $1,000, I heard myself say, for all 12. The auctioneer's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. All 12. Son, that's mighty generous, but 1,200, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. Final offer. The crowd murmured and parted as word spread that Jeremiah Cartwright's son was making a massive purchase. They probably thought it was some grand gesture for the ranch, expanding our workforce. They had no idea I was planning the biggest betrayal in Cartwright family history. 2 hours later, I loaded 12 terrified girls into my wagon. Their chains clinked with every bump in the road as we headed home. Sarah, the youngest with those striking blue eyes, kept staring at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Master Cartwright, she finally whispered, why did you buy all of us? I pulled the wagon to a stop under a cluster of oak trees, far enough from town that no one could see us. My hands shook as I produced the bolt cutters I'd purchased from the hardware store. Because, I said, approaching her chains, you're not going to be slaves anymore. The metal parted with a satisfying snap. Sarah's eyes went wide as dinner plates. I don't understand. I'm setting you free, all of you. I moved to Maria next, then Beth, working my way down the line. There's a cabin on the far edge of our ranch, hidden in the pine grove. You can stay there while we figure out how to get you somewhere safe. Tears streamed down Maria's face as her shackles fell away. This is a trick, has to be. No trick. I helped her rub circulation back into her wrists. I've seen enough of my father's world to know it's wrong. Dead wrong. For 6 months, I'd managed to keep them hidden. The cabin was isolated, accessible only by an old hunting trail I'd used as a boy. I brought them food, blankets, books to read. I watched Sarah learn to write her own name. I saw Maria smile for the first time. I helped Beth overcome the nightmares that woke her screaming in the night. They weren't the only ones I freed. Word spread through the underground networks that Jeremiah Cartwright's son could be trusted. Over those months, I purchased and freed 37 people, moving them north through a network of safe houses I'd helped establish. The cabin became a way station, a place where people could rest and heal before continuing their journey to freedom. I told myself I was being careful. I used different names, different towns, paid in cash. I covered my tracks like an outlaw because that's exactly what I was. An outlaw with a famous last name and access to unlimited funds. But Jeremiah Cartwright hadn't built an empire by being stupid. The first sign of trouble came last Tuesday when I noticed fresh horse tracks near the cabin. Not my tracks. Not the girls' bare feet. Heavy riding boots, the kind my father's men wore. My blood ran cold as I counted the prints. At least a dozen riders had circled the cabin. We need to move you tonight, I told them that evening as I brought supplies. Someone's been watching, Sarah looked up from the letter she was writing to a sister she hoped to find someday. Where will we go? North. There's a family in Colorado that... The cabin door exploded inward. 6 of my father's men poured in, guns drawn, faces hard as granite. Jake Morrison, my father's foreman, stepped through the wreckage with a rope in his hands. Well, Jake said, his gold tooth glinting in the lamplight. Look what we caught in our little trap. The girls screamed as the men grabbed them, snapping new shackles around their wrists. I lunged forward, but the butt of Jake's rifle caught me across the skull. The world spun as I hit the floor, tasting blood and sawdust. Your daddy's been watching you for months, boy, Jake said, hauling me to my feet. Every purchase, every move, every bleeding heart gesture. He leaned close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. He wanted to see how far his disappointment of a son would go. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Sarah crying my name. I tried to reach for her, but rough hands bound my arms behind my back. Now we find out what happens to Cartwright blood that's gone bad, Jake said, and dragging me toward the door. Outside, the night sky glowed orange with torchlight. 200 riders sat their horses in perfect formation, weapons gleaming, faces masked in shadow. At their head, mounted on his black stallion, sat my father. Even in the darkness, I could feel his cold blue eyes boring into my soul. Bring him, Jeremiah's voice carried across the night air. And bring the property. It's time my son learned the price of betrayal. The barn feels like a tomb as my father circles beneath me, his boots echoing with each deliberate step. The 12 girls huddled together in their chains, and I can see the hope dying in their eyes with every passing second. 6 months of freedom. 6 months of believing in something better, all crashing down in one nightmare evening. You disappointed me, Thomas. My father's voice carries the weight of 20 years of expectations. All those lessons about family honor, about the natural order of things, and this is how you repay me? I spit blood onto the hay below. The natural order is wrong. His laugh is colder than a February wind. Wrong? Boy, I carved this ranch out of wilderness with these hands. I built an empire that stretches from here to the Rio Grande. I feed half of Texas with my cattle, employ 300 men, and you think you can lecture me about wrong. Through the barn slats, I catch glimpses of his army. 200 riders, all armed, all waiting for his word. Some I recognize, ranch hands who've worked for us for years. Others are strangers, hired guns with dead eyes and quick trigger fingers. The torchlight plays across their weapons, a forest of rifle barrels pointed at my sanctuary. Look at them, my father says, gesturing to the girls. Really look. Do you see human beings? Or do you see $12,000 worth of prime property walking around free? Sarah raises her chin defiantly, despite the tears streaming down her face. We are human beings. My father's backhand sends her sprawling. The crack of flesh on flesh echoes through the barn like a gunshot. Maria scrambles to help her up, chains rattling, and I see something dangerous flash in the older woman's eyes. Something my father doesn't recognize. But I do. The look of someone with nothing left to lose. Property doesn't talk back, he says, drawing his gun again. Property knows its place. Don't, I rasp, my voice barely a whisper. Please don't. Oh, but I think I will. He presses the barrel against Sarah's temple. She closes her eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Unless you can give me one good reason why I shouldn't put this animal out of its misery right now. The world narrows to that gun barrel, that terrified girl, that monster wearing my father's face. My mind races through possibilities, desperate bargains, anything to buy time. Outside, I hear the stamp of horses, the creak of leather, the whispered conversations of men preparing for violence. Because, I say, forcing my voice to carry, killing her won't solve your real problem. His finger pauses on the trigger. My real problem? The whole territory knows what you are now. I meet his cold blue eyes with every ounce of defiance I can muster. Words spread about the cattle baron's son freeing slaves. Every abolitionist from here to Denver is watching this ranch. You kill those girls, you kill me, and you'll have federal marshals knocking down your door by morning. It's a bluff, but a good one. The Fugitive Slave Act is on shaky ground in Texas, and territorial politics change like prairie weather. My father built his empire by being ruthless, but also by being smart. He knows when to fight and when to negotiate. His hand wavers, just slightly, but I see it. Federal marshals, he repeats slowly. You're lying. Am I? I force a bloody smile. Check your mailbox tomorrow, old man. See what kind of attention your son's charitable work has attracted. For a long moment, the only sounds are the girls' quiet sobs and the restless movements of 200 horses outside. My father's face works through calculations, weighing risks and rewards, like he's bidding on cattle futures. Then Jake Morrison bursts through the barn door, his face flushed with excitement. Boss, we got company coming up the main road. Looks like a dozen riders, maybe more. My heart leaps. Could it be? Could someone actually be coming to help? My father's eyes narrow to slits. Federal? Can't tell yet, boss. They're still a mile out, but they're riding hard. The barn falls silent, except for the crackle of torches outside. My father holsters his gun and begins pacing, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. 12 girls watch him like prey animals watching a predator, waiting to see which way he'll strike. Here's what's going to happen, he says finally, his voice deadly calm. Those riders, whoever they are going to find a normal ranch running normal business. These girls are going back to the slave quarters where they belong. You're going to tell anyone who asks that you've seen the error of your ways. And if I refuse? His smile is pure winter. Then I'll hang you from this very beam and tell those riders that my son was killed by runaway slaves. Self-defense. Tragic loss for the family. He gestures toward the girls. Of course, we'd have to hunt down and execute the murderers. All of them. Slow. The ultimatum hits like a physical blow. 12 lives or mine. Freedom or death. The choice I've been dreading since this nightmare began. Outside, Jake Morrison shouts orders to the riders. Form up defensive positions, check your weapons. The approaching hoofbeats grow louder, more distinct. I count at least 15 horses, maybe 20, riding at full gallop toward the ranch. In minutes, they'll be here. Minutes to make a choice that will define the rest of my life, however long that might be. Sarah looks up at me with those impossibly blue eyes, and I see something there that breaks my heart. Forgiveness. Even now, even facing death or worse, she's trying to tell me it's okay, that she understands. But understanding and accepting are two different things. My father checks his pocket watch. 30 seconds to decide, boy. Your noble sacrifice, or their very practical deaths. Which legacy do you want to leave? The riders' voices echo across the night air now, close enough to make out individual words. Close enough to hear them calling my name. Thomas Cartwright, we know you're in there. The voice cuts through the night like thunder, and I recognize it instantly. Sheriff William Hayes, my father's oldest friend and poker partner. Not federal marshals, not abolitionists, just another puppet in Jeremiah Cartwright's empire. My heart sinks as the truth crashes over me. There is no rescue coming, no cavalry riding over the hill. Just 20 of my father's men dressed up as concerned lawmen, here to provide witnesses for whatever horror he's planning. Well, well, my father says, his cold smile returning. Looks like your federal marshals are running a bit late, son. Through the barn slats, I watch Sheriff Hayes dismount, his star glinting in the torchlight. Behind him, 20 deputies spread out in a perfect semicircle, their hands resting on their gun butts. Every face is familiar. Every man owes his job, his livelihood, maybe his life to Jeremiah Cartwright. Jeremiah, Hayes calls out. We got word there might be trouble out here. Something about stolen property and family disputes. My father steps to the barn door, playing his role perfectly. Bill, thank God you're here. I'm afraid my son has gotten himself mixed up in some unsavory business. His voice carries just the right note of parental disappointment and civic concern. I watch in sick fascination as he transforms from monster to grieving father in the space of a heartbeat. This is how he's built his empire, with performances like this. Convincing good men to look the other way, while evil wears a mask of respectability. What kind of business? Hayes asks, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer. Slave stealing, Bill. My own flesh and blood, helping runaways escape north. Got himself caught red-handed with a dozen of them tonight. The barn door slides open wider. Torchlight spills across the scene like liquid fire, illuminating my bound form hanging from the rafters and the 12 terrified girls chained below. Hayes steps inside, his weathered face carefully neutral. That true, Thomas? He asks, though he doesn't meet my eyes. I taste blood and betrayal. They're human beings, Sheriff. They deserve freedom. Law says different, boy. Hayes adjusts his hat, a nervous gesture I remember from childhood. Law says they're property, and property theft is a hanging offense. Whose law? My voice cracks with rage and desperation. Whose justice? The only law that matters in this county, my father interjects. Mine. Hayes nods slowly, and I see the exact moment he makes his choice. Not the choice between right and wrong, but the choice between Jeremiah Cartwright's friendship and his conscience. The friendship wins, like it always does. Well then, Hayes says, his voice flat and official, I suppose we need to discuss how to handle this situation. Can't have young men of good families getting mixed up in federal crimes. My father's smile is razor sharp. I'm sure we can find a reasonable solution, something that protects everyone involved. The code words hang in the air like smoke. A reasonable solution means money changing hands. Protection means silence bought and paid for. Everyone involved means everyone except the 12 girls whose lives hang in the balance. What about them? Hayes jerks his chin toward the girls, finally acknowledging their existence. Runaways, my father says dismissively. We'll deal with them according to territorial law. Make examples, you understand. Can't have this kind of rebellion spreading. Maria speaks up suddenly, her voice steady despite the chains. We weren't runaways. Thomas bought our freedom legal-like. We got papers. Papers? Hayes looks genuinely surprised. What papers? My father's mask slips for just an instant. Forged documents, obviously. You think I'd let my son waste $12,000 on worthless? They're not forged. I force the words out despite my swollen throat. Bills of sale, legal transfers of ownership, every transaction documented and witnessed. The barn goes quiet, except for the crackle of torches and the restless stamping of horses outside. Hayes looks from my father to me, clearly calculating political angles and personal risks. If the papers are legal. Hayes begins slowly. They're not legal, my father snaps, his careful control finally cracking. The boy had no authority to make those purchases. Every transaction was theft from the family trust. Actually, I rasp, tasting victory and blood in equal measure. I did have authority, full power of attorney over ranch business, signed by you 3 years ago. Remember? When you wanted to avoid personal liability for cattle futures. My father's face goes white. The legal document he'd forgotten about, the one that gave me sweeping authority to act on behalf of Cartwright Holdings. The same authority I'd used to purchase freedom for 37 souls over 6 months. Hayes pulls out a small notebook, suddenly looking very much like a real lawman instead of a bought one. If young Thomas had legal authority to make those purchases, he didn't. My father's voice rises to a near shout. I'm revoking that authority right now. Can't revoke what's already been exercised, Hayes says thoughtfully. If the transactions were completed under valid authority, they're binding contracts. Territorial law is pretty clear on that. The silence stretches like a held breath. 20 deputies wait for orders. 12 girls wait for salvation or death. 200 riders wait for the word to charge. And in the middle of it all, Sheriff William Hayes holds the balance of justice in his weathered hands. My father's face works through expressions of rage, calculation, and something I've never seen before. Fear. Not physical fear, but something deeper. The fear of a man who's built everything on control, watching that control slip away. There's another way, he says finally, his voice deadly quiet. Boy made those purchases with stolen money, family money he had no right to use for personal crusades. That's embezzlement, Bill. Federal crime. Hayes nods slowly. Could see it that way, I suppose. My heart sinks as I watch another legal door slam shut. Even with valid authority, using family funds for personal purposes could be construed as theft. My father's web of influence and power tightens around us all. But then Sarah speaks up, her young voice carrying clearly through the barn. He didn't steal nothing. We paid him back. Every eye turns to her. My father's face darkens with confusion and rage. Paid him back how? Hayes asks gently. Sarah's chin lifts with pride and defiance. Work, honest work. We've been sewing, cooking, cleaning for folks in town. Every penny we earned went back to Master Thomas to pay for our freedom. Maria keeps the books. Maria nods, pulling a small ledger from her dress pocket despite the chains. Every transaction recorded, every debt tracked. We paid him back in full 2 weeks ago, plus interest. The ledger hits the hay-covered floor like a thunderclap. The ledger lies open in the hay, its pages fluttering in the torch-heated air like the wings of dying birds. Sheriff Hayes bends down, his weathered fingers tracing the careful columns of numbers, dates, and transactions. Each entry, written in Maria's precise hand, tells the story my father never wanted anyone to hear. June 15th, Sarah, seamstress work for Mrs. Patterson, $3.50. Hayes reads aloud. June 20th, Beth, laundry services for Henderson family, $2.25. His voice grows stronger with each entry. July 4th, Maria, cooking for Independence Day celebration, $12. My father's face cycles through shades of rage and disbelief. Lies, all of it. Property can't earn wages. Property can't own property. Maybe not, Hayes says, still reading. But free people can. And according to this ledger, these women have been free since the day young Thomas bought them. He looks up at me, hanging from the rafters like a scarecrow. That true, boy? Blood drips from my split lip as I nod. Gave them their freedom papers the same day. Everything after that was their choice. Their choice to work off a debt they didn't legally owe, Hayes observes. Mighty noble of them. Noble? My father spits the word like poison. They're animals. You can't make contracts with animals. Something cold and terrible flickers across Hayes' weathered features. For 30 years, he's looked the other way, while Jeremiah Cartwright built his empire on human misery. But there are lines even corrupted men won't cross, and my father just stumbled across one of them. Animals. Hayes stands slowly, his hand resting on his gun butt. Bill, I got a daughter about Sarah's age. You saying she's an animal too? The temperature in the barn drops 20 degrees. Behind Hayes, 20 deputies shift nervously, suddenly unsure which way the wind is blowing. Outside, 200 riders wait in the darkness. But inside this barn, the balance of power is shifting like sand in a windstorm. My father realizes his mistake instantly, but it's too late to take back the words. Now, Bill, you know that's not what I meant. Know exactly what you meant. Hayes' voice carries 30 years of suppressed conscience. Same thing you've meant every time you've asked me to look the other way. Every time you've asked me to bend the law for Cartwright gold. The moment stretches taut as a bowstring. I can feel it building, this reckoning that's been decades in the making. 20 years of friendship, corruption, and willful blindness balanced against one moment of moral clarity. Then Jake Morrison makes the mistake that changes everything. Boss, he calls from outside the barn. You want us to just start shooting? End this whole mess quick and clean? The casual brutality of it, the easy assumption that murder is just another business decision, finally snaps something inside Sheriff Hayes. His gun clears leather faster than I've ever seen an older man move. Nobody shoots anybody, he shouts, his weapon trained on my father's chest. This is still my county, and we're still going to follow the law. The real law. My father's eyes go wide with shock and betrayal. Bill, what are you doing? My job. Finally. Hayes keeps his gun steady while addressing his deputies. Cut the boy down. Remove those chains from the women. Sheriff, one of the younger deputies protests. Mr. Cartwright says a lot of things, Hayes interrupts. But right now, I'm seeing evidence of unlawful imprisonment, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. That's what goes in my report. The barn erupts into chaos. Half the deputies move to follow Hayes' orders, while the others look uncertainly toward my father. Outside, Jake Morrison shouts contradictory commands to the 200 riders. Voices rise in argument and confusion as 30 years of carefully maintained order collapses in minutes. Deputy Marcus Webb cuts the rope binding my wrists. I crash to the hay-covered floor, my shoulders screaming as circulation returns to my arms. Sarah crawls toward me despite her chains, her face streaked with tears and hope. Thomas, she whispers, is it over? Before I can answer, my father's voice cuts through the chaos like a blade. You're making a mistake, Bill. A fatal mistake. Hayes turns to face him, gun still drawn. Only mistake I made was waiting 30 years to do this. You think those badges mean anything without my support? You think any of you will have jobs tomorrow if you cross me? My father's voice carries the cold authority of absolute power. I own this county. I own every man in it. Maybe you did, Hayes says quietly. But some things can't be bought. My father's laugh is harsh and bitter. Everything can be bought, Bill. Including you. How much money have I put in your pocket over the years? How many crimes have you ignored? How many innocent people have suffered because you took my gold? The accusation hangs in the air like smoke. Hayes's gun hand wavers, and I see the weight of 30 years of compromise bearing down on him. Every bribe taken, every injustice ignored, every time he chose comfort over conscience. But then Maria speaks up from her chains, her voice strong and clear. Doesn't matter what you did before, Sheriff. Matters what you do right now. Hayes looks at her, then at Sarah, then at the other 10 girls still bound in chains. Young faces full of hope and terror, depending on one man's ability to choose redemption over corruption. You're right, he says finally. It does matter what I do right now. His gun swings toward my father's foreman. Jake Morrison, you're under arrest for assault and conspiracy. Jake's hand drops toward his weapon, but Hayes is ready. I wouldn't. Not unless you want to join your boss in a federal prison. The standoff stretches for heartbeats that feel like hours. 200 armed riders outside, 20 confused deputies inside, 12 chained women watching their fate unfold. And in the middle of it all, one old sheriff trying to balance 30 years of scales. Then the barn door explodes open, and everything changes forever. Federal Marshal James Crawford steps into the torchlight, his badge gleaming, 6 hard-faced deputies behind him. Real federal deputies, not local puppets. Behind them come 20 soldiers in blue uniforms, rifles at the ready. Sheriff Hayes, Crawford says formally, we received reports of federal crimes being committed on this property. My father goes pale as winter snow. Federal crimes? Crawford produces a thick folder of documents. Trafficking in persons across territorial boundaries, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy to commit murder. His cold eyes find my father. We've been watching the Cartwright operation for months, Mr. Cartwright. Your son's activities just gave us the excuse we needed to move. The truth hits like lightning. This was never about my secret purchases or hidden cabins. The federal government has been building a case against my father's empire, and my amateur abolitionist activities just provided the final piece of evidence they needed. Thomas, Crawford continues, your cooperation with our investigation has been invaluable. I stare at him in confusion. My cooperation. Every purchase documented, every transaction recorded, every person you freed provided testimony about conditions on Cartwright properties. Crawford's smile is grimly satisfied. We couldn't have built a stronger case if we'd planned it ourselves. My father's face goes through a dozen emotions before settling on pure, murderous rage. You, he says to me, you planned this. My own son. No, I rasp, still struggling to understand. I never. Doesn't matter if you planned it or not. Crawford interrupts. Justice got served either way. 6 months later, I stand on the porch of a small house in Colorado, watching Sarah tend her vegetable garden. The federal trial sent my father to prison for life. His empire dissolved and sold to pay reparations to the hundreds of people he'd enslaved. The Cartwright name, once feared across Texas, now serves as a cautionary tale about the price of absolute power. Sheriff Hayes resigned his badge the day after the arrests, but he visits sometimes. We don't talk about the past. Some redemptions are too fragile for words. Mariah runs a successful seamstress shop in Denver. Beth learned to read and write, then taught 12 other former slaves to do the same. All the girls I freed found their own paths to new lives, carrying the scars of their past, but no longer bound by its chains. I kept nothing from my father's fortune except the clothes on my back and the knowledge that some things matter more than blood or gold. The rope burns on my wrists have healed. but they remind me daily that freedom isn't free. It's paid for in courage, one choice at a time. Sometimes the only way to truly live is to risk everything for what's right.